We are going to receive and file, receive a presentation from the staff regarding the state of housing in Yountville. And we have our Director of Planning and Building, Aaron Hecock, who is taking the chair with a single mouse that we seem to own. So,
before Aaron gets started, Mayor, just a couple quick opening comments, just to remind the council and the community. This is the second in a series of discussions the council has requested in response to questions that came up during the Commons process. Tonight's session is focused on housing. Our goal tonight is to provide information and maybe in some instances educate the community and maybe council, although you're pretty familiar with this subject matter, on housing conditions in the community, affordability, state laws, state legislation, how the town is required to carry out its planning for housing, meeting housing needs, what the requirements of those laws are. Our production. I know I'm stealing your intro slide here, and sorry. Anyway, we're going to give an overview and provide some information with the goal of helping, again, inform and educate the community on what we do and what conditions are, and hopefully, engage in a discussion and some question and answers, both with council and anyone here tonight who's interested in learning more or asking, more detailed questions than we've given in the presentation. So with that, I'll stop stealing Aaron's show and turn it over to Director Hecock.
Thank you, Ken, and Mayor and Council. So housing presentation, you'd have to bear with me. We have a lot to get through here. And there we go. So as Ken alluded to, this presentation is going to cover existing housing stock and affordability, state requirements for housing affordability, housing sites and housing production, options for meeting housing needs, and consequences for noncompliance.
I think I have too many systems going over here between the Zoom, so if you could just say next slide, I'll advance them for you.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, key takeaways from the presentation. The town is currently not on pace to meet its very low income RHNA housing obligation. Less than 10% of that town's existing housing is affordable to moderate and lower income households. The town is at risk of losing approximately 20% of its existing affordable housing stock in the next 10 years. The majority of our local workforce needs housing that is affordable to moderate and lower incomes. If approved and anticipated projects come to fruition, the town will likely need to identify new housing sites to meet future RHNA needs and future housing element cycles. There are limited housing sites available for meeting current and future housing needs. Next slide, please. Okay, existing housing stock and affordability. Next slide, please. Okay, so currently there are approximately 1,372 existing housing units in the town of Yountville. You can see here that a majority of those are single-family homes, followed by mobile homes, then townhomes, then almost equal number of multifamily 2 to 4 units and multifamily 5 units or more. Next slide, please. So housing costs. The median housing cost for a single-family home in Yountville is approximately $1.35 to $1.7 million. And the annual income required to afford a single-family home in that price range is roughly $365,000 to $515,000. The median cost to rent an apartment in Yountville, a one-bedroom, ranges in roughly $2,300 to $3,000 per month, two-bedroom, $4,000 to $6,000 per month. And the annual income required for those apartments for a one-bedroom ranges $85,000 to $108,000, or for a two-bedroom, $151,000 to $212,000 a year. Next slide, please. So the affordability of the existing housing stock, of those housing units, 100 of those, are approximately 7%, are deed restricted to be affordable to moderate and lower income households, and you can see that breakdown there. Only 13 of those are very low, and the rest are between low and moderate. And of note, these affordable units are monitored by the Housing Authority for compliance with these affordability standards, and they are also either owned or operated largely by nonprofits, including Napa Valley Community Housing and Burbank Housing. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, Mayor, quick question while we're just in that slide. So when we talk about the 100, those are deed restricted. They're either owner occupied or rental.
That's correct.
That's the 100 in the community.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
And so this is just a few photos of what some of the affordable housing looks like in town. You see the Hopper Creek Apartments, Arroyo Grande, the Mount Avenue Cottages, and then Washington Park. Next slide, please. This shows the location of the affordable units in town. You can see 24 down there at Hopper Creek, and then moving forward and going up. Interesting distribution going kind of north to south there, with Town Hall being the star in the middle. Next slide, please.
Mayor, real quickly, when we're looking at those two neighborhoods, I know it's a view of the town, but we're on the north end, those are homes in the Washington Park, Washington Estates or community, is that right?
That's right. And there's also, it's hard to tell, it's hard to read from here, but the Mount Avenue cottages are on there.
Right,
There's also
so it's that neighborhood in the north end, Mount Avenue, the cottages, and then Washington Park and Washington Square.
Yep.
Okay. And then on the part near the Y, that is the Oak Circle neighborhood, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Where some of those homes were basically built years ago as self-help construction, but it's that neighborhood behind Ranch Market.
You got it. Okay. And then Arroyo.
And all the ones on Yount, too, are on there, because there's quite a few on Yount. Yes.
So the cluster in Washington Park, and I don't know the history, but I'm sure Eric and Pam do, that must have been the developer was required to make those affordable or de-restricted as part of the development?
I would assume so, yes.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, please. So affordable units at risk of converting to market rates. So of those 100 deed restricted, approximately 20% of those units are going to be potentially lost in the next 10 years, meaning their affordable agreements are going to expire. And so what staff can do is reach out to the owners of those and have conversations with them about what their plans are. Ultimately, it's up to the owners to decide what they want to do. An example of that is we did reach out to Napa Valley Community Housing, who owns the Mount Avenue cottages, last fall, sat down and met with them. Their agreement is expiring next year. And they indicated that they are planning on, even though it's expiring, planning on leaving those units as affordable units. They also potentially expressed interest in adding additional units onto the site as well. So we'll see what happens with that. Next slide, please. So now we're moving on to state requirements for housing affordability. So as we all know, California faces severe and persistent housing shortage driven by decades of restrictive zoning policies, high construction costs, and limited housing production. The state has experienced skyrocketing home prices and rents that have made housing unaffordable for millions of residents across all income levels. The supply of housing in California has not kept up with demand, especially for those affordable units as housing prices continue to rise. And over the past 10 years, the state legislature has passed more than 200 laws addressing various aspects of this housing challenge. New state laws have made it harder for cities to restrict housing development. Next slide, please. So, legislative actions to stimulate housing production. The Housing Crisis Act of 2019 is a big one, and that prevents cities from reducing intensity of housing development on land where housing is allowed and from opposing and enforcing new subjective design standards after January 1st, 2020. And this is really known as the no net loss rule. So essentially, if you have a residentially zoned property, you can't, if you convert that to or rezone that to a commercial use, you have to find another equal parcel that can accommodate the same density of that residential parcel and upzone it. Certain housing projects may be built by right in some locations without discretionary approval. So that's multifamily or certain mixed-use housing projects consistent with objective design standards don't require a use permit, and that's essentially SB 35. And then some residential development is allowed in non-residential zoning districts in certain circumstances, and that would be vacant commercial properties along certain transportation corridors and things like that. There's also lots of reforming the California Environmental Quality Act to reduce timelines for housing projects. And they've also added numerous exemptions for infill housing with those as well. Expediting project approvals and permitting through streamlined reviews. And this essentially places limits on how long we have to review and issue building permits for various housing projects, including ADUs. And allowing diverse housing solutions like increasing housing density through multifamily housing and infill development near transit, and streamlining accessory dwelling unit approvals. So in summary, this is what this slide has really shown, is that the state has slowly been taking away local control over housing projects year after year after year.
And also, our town attorney keeps us updated. There are so many of these housing laws that are coming that we, as council, get regular updates about this, and we have lots of questions, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot less local control than we used to have, and it's hard. It's hard for us. I'm sure it's hard for the public to say, well, how come this big thing is coming in and it's looking right in my window and I can't do anything about it?
It's been nonstop.
Right. Thank you.
So local planning housing element. So under California state law, every city and county must adopt and maintain a housing element as one of the required elements of its general plan. And that housing element serves as the community's long-term strategy for meeting existing and projected housing needs for all income levels. Unlike other general plan elements, it must be adopted on a state-established schedule and reviewed for compliance by HCD. Next slide, please.
I just want to make another comment, too. This is your first housing element here in Yountville, right, Aaron? It's that you worked on?
No, I didn't. It was done before I got here.
It was done? Oh, you lucked out. It's in the past, it's been a fairly easy process. There's been a template. We have experts that kind of help. Then it goes off to the state, and usually in a few weeks it's certified. This last housing element went on for months and months. We had extra consultants, and it was very, very difficult to pass it. So things have changed up there. Ken, do you have, and Gary, do you want to comment on
I was actually
this
here
process?
in the interim capacity as planning director at the time, and your observation is correct. And it's not just Yountville. It's gotten harder for. It's all cities. HCD, has gotten good at learning the practices that, various cities have used throughout California to avoid, meeting its housing needs or addressing them in compliance with state law. So HCD is good at kind of sniffing out, half-baked efforts, and I'm not saying that's what happened here in Yountville. I'm just trying to point out that HCD has gotten a lot tougher and a lot smarter on looking at housing elements and making sure each city and county is meeting, housing element law. And so it doesn't surprise me. When I left in my interim capacity, we were on track. HCD had said, if you do, what you're showing us you're going to do, we'll certify your element. I came back a year later and was a little surprised to find there was more discussion after they told you you were going to get certified. They decided there were some more things, the town needed to do. And fortunately, we were able to do that and get certification. But your point of it's a hard process with HCD, and my point of HCD is getting tougher in their review of cities, up and down California is a fair one and a valid one.
Yeah, I'd just add that HCD was previously a fairly passive agency, and that's changed. So over the last 5 years in particular, with all the state laws that have removed a lot of the discretion and control that locals used to enjoy has been taken away. And at the same time, they have increased enforcement ability and enforcement powers for HCD. So HCD really looks at the housing element now to make sure that you're implementing the opportunity sites and that the housing at the different income levels is actually going in. So in the last cycle, for example, there were several opportunity sites that had been included in previous cycles, and HCD forced the town to take them out and identify new sites. Aaron's going to talk about that in a moment, so I won't take the wind out of his presentation. But they are taking a very close look at everything, from the very small jurisdictions to very large jurisdictions, and then also doing mid-cycle reviews and initiating enforcement when that happens.
can you talk briefly about some of that enforcement? It's been pretty hot and heavy in the news in the last few weeks, so.
Yeah.
On Half Bay,
Yeah.
they're coming out.
Yeah, there's a few slides on that at the end here, too.
Oh, okay, I can wait.
But fines, and then they can also decertify your housing element. And if that happens, it triggers a series of state laws that allow developers to come in without any town input at all.
So, Gary, how many, I was reading an article in the Chronicle about the Bay Area, and I think one city had its housing element either decertified or not certified. Out of the 370 cities, how many would you say have either had their housing element decertified or not certified at all, just as a guesstimate?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, and I'd be hesitant to guesstimate that. What I will say is that the housing element cycles there's different regions of the state that are on different cycles, so that HCD is not reviewing all 483 cities and 58 counties at the same time. So Northern California and the Bay Area counties are on one particular cycle that happens. They changed the deadlines in the state law for how that happens. So this last cycle, cities submitted to HCD on time, but HCD had too many to review within the deadline for adopting. So it put a lot of local jurisdictions in a tough spot, because if you don't have an adopted housing element, then it's not in substantial compliance, and then all of the other laws are triggered, but HCD needs to sign off first. And so a lot of jurisdictions adopted before HCD took formal action on their housing elements, and then HCD finally did review after the fact and had revisions and had to come back. And so there was this period of questionable compliance.
Okay, next slide. Oh, you're already there. So key components of the housing element. First, the housing needs assessment, which analyzes the existing and projected housing needs based on population, household, employment, and demographic trends. Second, the housing inventory and conditions evaluates the community's existing housing stock, including age, affordability, vacancy rates, special housing needs. Third is the sites inventory, which is the adequate sites analysis, and that is to demonstrate that sufficient land is available with appropriate zoning and development capacity to accommodate the jurisdiction's share of its RENA for all income levels, which is important to note. Conservation and preservation include strategies to preserve affordable housing stock, prevent displacement where appropriate, maintain the existing housing stock. Then there are the programs and policies which establish specific actions the jurisdiction will undertake to facilitate housing production, preserve existing housing, remove barriers, and promote fair housing. And so I'll just point out, so one of the goal in the housing element, goal H3, the goal is a variety of housing types. It means provide for a variety of housing types. The policy 3.3 associated with that goal is to promote the development of multifamily housing. And then program 2022, or part of it, under that policy 3.3 is the town will review and revise the zoning ordinance to ensure compliance with state law. So that's kind of an example of the structure on how that's laid out. And then finally, implementation and monitoring, and that's committing to measurable programs with timelines and responsible parties, and report annually on the implementation to HCD. Next slide, please. So RENA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, is California's method for determining how much housing is needed statewide and assigning the responsibility for planning that housing among the cities and counties. The process is intended that every community plans for its fair share of housing at all income levels and supports statewide housing goals. So HCD determines the total number of housing units needed for each region over that 8-year planning period, which is the housing element cycle, which is based on projected population growth, existing housing, overcrowding, cost burdens, vacancy rates, and other housing needs. And then the regional COG, which here is ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, then allocates those housing numbers to the various jurisdictions within that region. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I just noted, then every 8 years, ABAG develops a methodology to allocate the region's housing needs among the local jurisdictions. Each city and county in the Bay Area receives its allocation in 4 income categories, which is very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And then each city and county must update its housing element to demonstrate it has sufficiently appropriately zoned land and policies to accommodate that RENA allocation. And so RENA does not require us to actually build or guarantee that housing will be constructed. Instead, it requires that we remove unreasonable barriers and maintain adequate zoning capacity and adopt programs that facilitate housing development. However, a lack of production can lead HCD to requiring more aggressive programs. And so then as far as compliance and enforcement is concerned, HCD reviews housing elements for compliance, and jurisdictions without a compliant housing element may face legal challenges, reduced eligibility for certain state funding programs, and potential enforcement actions under California housing laws. Next slide, please. So here's our current RENA allocation. We have 19 very low, 11 low, 12 moderate, and 30 above moderate for a total of 72. Next slide, please. So here is Napa County annual income limits, and this is effective as of June 1, 2026. And so these are the income limits for those RENA allocation criteria. So very low, low, medium, and moderate. So essentially, anything under from 80 to 120 falls under the moderate. And you can see that is broken up by how many people there are per household. So that number does go up depending on how many persons there are per household.
Can you you're going to speak? Can you also address the two new extra low income?
I'll let Director Hecock address that. I just
Okay.
wanted to point out so people, understand what this table is showing. If we look at the column titled low, which is 80% of median income, and it shows for a single person, you are low income if your annual income is $98,000 a year. So we'll just keep that in mind when you hear terms low income, very low income. We're not talking about households that make $20,000 a year, $10,000 a year. We're talking about households that are making $98,000 a year.
Or two individuals earning $112,000 are considered low.
Yes.
So, I think the mayor was talking about acutely low and extremely low income categories. And so those are, in the RENA process, those are grouped under the low income. So essentially they have a percentage and they'll divvy that up as far as that's concerned. But there are even lower than low.
And have those been approved yet by the legislature?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, but they're very likely coming from everything I kind of hear working through the system. Okay, thanks.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then we just saw what the low, very low with those income levels are, and here's estimated income levels of the local workforce. Obviously, these are estimates, and there's going to be a range, and they're going to vary, but you see hotel maids and housekeepers, $45,000 a year, very low. Hospitality managers, $87,000, $88,000 low. Retail sales, $37,000, very low, and so on and so forth. So it just gives an example of what our actual needs are for these housing types.
Mayor, I think this is one of the more is an important one, because when you remove the registered nurse, firefighter, town staff person, then you're talking about the folks that work in this community that are earning low or very low income levels. So I see this report was generated from Generation Housing, which has done research for the County of Sonoma, and recently the Napa County Board of Supervisors hired them to do research for income level for the Napa Valley. And generally, when we were talking with the Commons, we were receiving information about Yountville and the greater area that shows that we have people that work here predominantly are on the low to very low income schedule. So there's no surprises or any significant surveys that need to be done of our staff in this town that show that the folks that work here are earning about the same thing that work in the other hotels and the restaurants all over the valley. And and from my perspective, and that's being on the council now, and 25, 30 years ago, the council's present and past have always recognized the fact that we have a responsibility as a partner in the valley to find housing for folks that are working at the low and very low and serve this community and provide us the services that get us the TOT and sales tax. So it's a recognition for us that this council, past councils, or councils in the future, we're going to be talking about how we do our best to provide opportunities for people to live and work in the community that are serving us and giving us a good quality of life. But I think that one shows that when you look at most of those columns, those are the folks that are working here in this community, and and it's good that we are concerned about it, and we certainly don't defer to any other community, whether it's St. Helena or Napa or American Canyon, the responsibility of doing our share to provide that housing. So thank you. I just wanted to.
Okay. Next slide, please. So housing sites and housing production. Next slide. So we touched on this briefly earlier. Under California state housing element law, the site analysis is one of the mandatory and important components of the housing element. The site's analysis must convincingly demonstrate to HCD that the jurisdiction has a realistic and legally adequate inventory of land capable of accommodating its RHNA during the planning period. It's not nearly enough on paper, but the sites are likely to develop at the densities and affordability levels assumed in the housing element. Next slide, please. So a site analysis must identify sufficient land to accommodate the jurisdiction's entire RHNA by income category, including vacant sites and, where appropriate, non-vacant sites with a realistic development potential. So site suitability evaluates whether each site is physically suitable for residential development and considers factors such as parcel size, configuration, topography, environmental constraints, availability of utilities and public services, and surrounding land uses. And then appropriate zoning. So we must demonstrate that the zoning allows for the residential development at the density sufficient to accommodate the assigned income category. And then finally, analyze the development standards to ensure that they do not unduly constrain housing production. Next slide, please. So realistic development capacity. So that's estimating the number of housing units each site can reasonably accommodate using realistic assumptions rather than theoretical maximums. And then consider market conditions, parcel characteristics, existing development, and likely project types. And likelihood of development, so again, demonstrate that the sites are likely to develop during the housing element planning period. So just putting a site out there and saying, no, we're choosing this one if there's no chance it's going to develop isn't going to fly with HCD anymore. And for sites with existing uses, provide evidence that redevelopment is feasible, such as underutilized market trends, owner interest, or redevelopment history, and additional statutory requirements relying on non-vacant or previously identified sites. And so there are a few notes here at the bottom. So the first one is that sites can be used in multiple housing elements. However, state law and HCD do impose increasingly stringent requirements when a site is reused. For instance, when a non-vacant site is used in 2 consecutive housing elements, the residential development becomes by right if a project then contains over 20% affordable units. So no use permit, it's permitted by right use.
So let's go through that again, just so everybody's really clear what they're telling us.
Yeah, so so we're in the 6th cycle. We have our identified housing sites that we'll go through here in a moment. If those sites were used in the 5th cycle housing element, so now we've used them 2 times in a row. Now moving forward, and this is all outlined in the housing element, if a project comes forward that contains 20% affordable units, it's a by right project, meaning no use permits required. Now, that doesn't exempt it from CEQA. It doesn't exempt a subdivision map from going through a process, or design review for that matter. But then the design review is subject only to objective standards. So you're essentially checking a box, just like the subdivision map is essentially going to be checking a box. So it really limits discretion.
So most of the decision-making within town hall is really done by your department, and it's limited.
That's correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I'm just, with respect to that note, it says a non-vacant site is used in 2 consecutive housing elements. So that's a non-vacant site, not an undeveloped
Right.
land. So is it a different rule for undeveloped land?
So non-vacant, so a vineyard is considered non-vacant. So a vacant site is just an empty site, essentially. And
I guess I'm just asking, is it a different rule? Non-vacant, I'm thinking in my mind, there's a building
it's a little more strict.
So it's a different rule if it's an undeveloped site.
If it's vacant, yeah, it's less. They impose less requirements on vacant sites.
Less meaning you could use them more often. You can use them in more elements, housing elements.
No, so they won't. Go ahead.
I think, Councilman, to answer your question, if you have a vacant site that is identified in 2 consecutive housing elements and doesn't develop, you are not allowed to continue to show that site as meeting, or identifying that as a housing opportunity site in your housing element.
Okay, that's what I was asking. So it doesn't really matter. The same rule for vacant and non-vacant.
It's a little different. This has a provision on, by right. I don't know.
Just generally, yeah.
Generally.
I'm not trying to, right. I know this stuff is ridiculously complex, but just in general. Okay, thank you.
So then, to that, so HCD then closely reviews sites that have appeared repeatedly without producing housing, especially for lower income RENA, and often imposes requirements upon those sites. So if you've redone it and nothing's happening, they may require that you rezone it or change the development standards or timelines for alternative site selection. Okay, next slide, please. So here are our opportunity sites and the RENA projections. And so site 1, you see, is the French Laundry Garden. And in the housing element, they projected 16 lower income units there on 1 acre, only 1 acre of that site. And we'll show that in an aerial in a moment. Site 2 is the Catholic Church site. And of that entire site, they only assumed development on 2.3 acres of it. However, the housing element assumes 72 units on that. And then the 3 remaining are all on Humboldt, 2 of which were part of the mixed-use project that was approved last year. And you'll see there were only 3 units assumed for that, and actually 5 were approved, so that's good. The third one on Humboldt is the one east of the development there. It's kind of sandwiched in between 2 homes, and so I don't know how likely that is to develop in the near term. But you will notice that the total realistic capacity that we came up with is 93 units, which is obviously more than the 72. That's because each CD requires a buffer. So they give you the 72, but then they, just to be sure, they want you to show 15 to 20% more typically in your housing element, that you're going above and beyond that number. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's housing element opportunity site number 1 that we just mentioned, the French Laundry Garden. And so you'll see that the 1 acre there is kind of fronting Weber, and it's where those existing single-family homes are now. Next slide. This is the Catholic Church site, and of that portion there, only 2.3 acres. Okay. So yeah, the assumption was that 72 units were going to be produced there on that west side of the property. I will say, I think we're all aware that the site has been listed for sale, and that includes the entire eastern portion of that site as well, which is 12.4 acres. And so we could see a development application for a much larger project than that was assumed in the housing element.
But most of that's in the 100-year floodplain, too.
That is correct. That entire east of the creek is in the 100-year.
Although the 2.3 acres is probably more developable.
It's easier to develop,
right.
for
And,
sure.
I know it's just rumor, but is the rumor true that there have been some actual initial inquiries to the planning department about developing that site?
We've had some meetings with some prospective buyers of the property, yes.
Okay, because I'm guessing they want to know what they can put on it will determine what they want to pay for it.
That's correct.
And so you are the key to what to put on it.
Yep. Next slide, please. So those are the sites on Humboldt. As I just mentioned, the one on the left there is actually 2 parcels, and that's where the 5-unit mixed-use project was approved last year. Next slide, please. That is the house kind of north on I guess there is no house there, the basically vacant lot on North Jefferson. And it's 0.34 acres, and the housing element only assumed 1 unit on that. I think that would possibly be a candidate for an upzoning at some point if that is something we wanted to look into. I think under the current density range, which is 8 units an acre, it would allow 3 units now, but something to consider just given where it is in its current configuration. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our RENA allocation and then where we're at with building permits issued, which is when you get credit from HCD for a RENA unit. It's when the building permit's issued. And then also the approved 16 units between Oak and Vine and the Humboldt project. So between those two, we're at 29 of the 72, but I think the thing to really note here is the very low income. Even if we see other things develop, over town, I think the very low is going to be tough to hit based on where we're at now. Next slide, please. And so this shows a projection kind of based on what I was just saying. So that shows the 29 units where we're at, and then essentially going back 10 years, we've issued 3 to 3.5 building permits a year for new residential units. So going with that average of 3 units a year, this shows us at 44 units at the end of the housing element cycle. So next slide, please. So options for meeting housing needs and consequences for noncompliance. Next slide, please. So other options for accommodating a RENA obligation include deed restricting of existing residential units, and that would require a deed restriction for 55 years and would require the property owner be willing to do so. Obviously, annual reporting and compliance monitoring by the housing authority, and then only can't count towards 25% of our overall RENA number. Increased ADU production still requires a willing property owner and property owner investment. And another issue here in town is that some properties may be constrained due to a smaller lot size, limiting detached ADUs. And so if those folks were interested, it would potentially require interior conversion space or potentially adding a second story. And then obviously rezoning. So rezoning vacant or underutilized parcels to allow for increased densities, or rezone non-residential properties for residential uses. And as we've noted, there are limited numbers of larger vacant and or underutilized properties in town. Next slide, please. So these are the sites we could potentially, depending on how things go, consider in the next housing element cycle to use as opportunity sites. So again, there's the eastern portion of the Catholic Church site. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there. If nothing ends up happening, that's going to potentially be an option. There's the 1.5 acre site there just east of Hotel Yountville, and that's currently zoned single family residential. There's one house on it. The property is heavily constrained due to access. It's got a very narrow entrance point, and apparently there's no easement out back into the mobile home park for EVA access, so constrained to say the least. Next slide, please. I think we all know this one. So this is the Parks and Playfields portion of the Yountville Commons site. Next slide, please. And this is the agricultural parcel on the northeast side of town, which is obviously 32.5 acres. So, if we ended up deciding to use part of that, I don't think we would need to use the whole thing. But just pointing out that's the size of the parcel. Next slide, please. So, consequences to not meeting state requirements, as Gary touched on earlier. So identifying additional housing sites, state could require general plan or zoning amendments to create additional housing sites and or require amendments to the town zoning standards to increase residential densities and development potential for properties. decertification of the housing element. Housing element is decertified by HCD. Qualifying housing developments may be approved even if they don't comply with general plan or zoning regulations. This is what's known as the builder's remedy. So in effect, the state removes some local control over land use as a consequence of the city's noncompliance. One thing to note is that those builder's remedy projects do require at least 20% of the units be for lower income households, and CEQA does still apply to those projects as well. Another potential consequence is a loss of state funding opportunities, and so that is an inability to obtain state funding under certain programs. Those are typically housing and infrastructure-related funding programs that require a compliant housing element to be qualified for. And then finally, litigation, and this is initiated by the Attorney General to compel compliance and/or levy fines. The court may suspend a town's authority to issue building permits or grant zoning changes, variances, or subdivision map approvals. And it's interesting, we started preparing this before last week, and I think as the mayor just mentioned, the Attorney General exercised this power, I believe, last week, bringing litigation against 5 jurisdictions here in the state. Next slide, please. So the conclusions that we briefly touched on earlier is that we're not currently on pace to meet our low-income housing obligations. Less than 10% of the town's existing housing is affordable to moderate and lower income households. The town is at risk of losing 20% of its existing affordable housing stock in the next 10 years. The majority of our local workforce needs housing that is affordable to moderate and low incomes. And if approved and anticipated projects do come to fruition, the town will likely need to identify new housing sites for meeting future RHNA needs. And there are limited housing sites available for meeting current and future housing needs. And that concludes the presentation, and would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, first I'll see if the council has any questions. Any questions?
Do you want me to push my button?
No, I'll get to you. So you go first, and then
Oh, I'm
then
sorry, I
you'll
didn't
go.
know, Pam.
I just want to go back to that last slide. The last statement there are limited housing sites available for meeting current and future housing needs. So we get a RHNA allowance every 8 years. What happens, say, in 2 or 3 cycles when there are no within town limits sites? Is then there a, I don't know, do they give up or do we give up?
No, it's hard to say, and it really, there are a lot of things that will depend, but I think at some point we could become built out, and I believe they've designated a few jurisdictions in the state as essentially being built out. Mm-hmm. But you never know. They could just say, oh, you got to go up, increase density. So, it's really hard to predict where it'll be that far into the future.
So in the other slide that showed the trajectory of how many, what is it? It's the actual and projected residential growth. It shows our allotment is 72 and our actual projected is 44 at this point. And you mentioned a couple of times that we're not on track to meet our very low, but we're not on track to meet any of the categories, basically, right?
That's fair based on historical trends.
So we would need housing at all levels to make our RHNA numbers.
Yep.
And then when you were talking about the Catholic Church property that was just rezoned in the front along Washington Street, and that small piece was the one that you were estimating there would be 72 units on that site?
That's what it says in the housing element.
Oh.
Yep.
But okay, so if there were 72 units that were deemed to be part of the RHNA configuration, how many regular units would then be attributed to that small piece? Do you understand what? So they're not going to just build, even if it's an affordable housing developer, which I don't think is who's sniffing around right now. So if it were somebody who was a for-profit builder, they would be building other. types of housing besides the low-income or moderate-income housing?
Yeah, so, I mean, given that, I would say, they'll probably go with the 20% to go with the buy right, so 20% of the 72, whatever that number is.
So we wouldn't get the full 72 out of that site?
No, not for affordable. That'd be 20% of 72 is 14 units. So 14 of the 72 would likely be affordable.
Okay, so
I don't know if that's what
we
you're
wouldn't
getting at.
meet our
But
RENA numbers with that property?
No, but I will say that the way the church is selling that property, it's likely not going to be the front portion that's going to develop with housing. It's going to be that eastern portion in the floodplain, and they're going to have to figure out those environmental constraints.
Right.
So I wouldn't anticipate going forward that housing is going to be the way the housing element thought it would be. It's going to be on the eastern portion of a much larger parcel.
So if it is the larger parcel and they do figure out the flooding issue,
Yep.
what would the maximum number of houses be, considering 20% affordable?
So, good question. So that site's 12.44 acres. What the maximum is, so it's the allowed density there is 10 to 20 units an acre. 10 units an acre would be 124 units, so double that, 248 would be the max allowed. But based on the lower income, the lower number, so let's say they go with the minimum allowed, again, 124 units. If they did just the 15%, which is the inclusionary requirement, is 15%, that would be 19 affordable units.
So in addition to the 120,
No, it would just be of that 120.
that would be included?
Correct. And if they did the 20% to kick in that buy right provision, that would be 25 units. And then our inclusionary breaks up how those are distributed differently between ownership and rental units, so the numbers are a little bit different. But essentially, you're, under, let's go with the 15, the conservative approach. Under an ownership model, it'd be 6 very low, 7 low, 6 moderate. And if they were rental, it'd be 9 very low and 10 low.
And it seems like the councils previous to us had instigated this realization, which we are having now with the Washington Square properties, where for our investment in low-cost housing, it's better for a rental unit versus an ownership unit, because those tend to fall out and we've lost the whole investment or the realization of that unit because someone now owns it.
Yeah.
So would we change our requirement to be only rental units in order to make sure they were in perpetuity?
So, that would be something we consider for housing that, we, contribute money to, or units that we buy or things like that, but that wouldn't really apply to the Catholic Church site.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Tripp.
Well, one comment I would like to make about the 20% that's falling off, and Washington Park, where I think the developer probably paid to build those. We have spoken about how housing can create wealth for people. And there are people in Washington Park, I don't know how long the deed restriction was, 20, 25 years, who've been there now 20 or 25 years and can sell the house and retire. And it is what I've heard council members speak about, which is a step to help people develop wealth. So I'm not personally thinking losing deed restricted housing in and of itself is such a bad thing. But my main question is, how do we, I gave a little thought to how we compare to other jurisdictions. And I mentioned this to you. There was an article in the Chronicle, and I'll be happy to share it with anybody. As of the end of 2025, what all the Bay Area cities, how far they were on their housing elements, and how many units have been constructed. And it will vary between 4% and 7%. Nobody was over 7%. So if you look at, and again, I'm all for housing. I just feel facts are good and realism is good and panic is not good. If you include what, out of the 70 units, if you include what we've built, we're at about 20%, I think, of our housing element. And if you include what's been approved, like Oak and Vine, then we're at almost 40%. And we're we still have, so we have a ways to go. So the rest, just to recap, the rest of the Bay Area, and I don't have the facts for northern, this part of the Bay Area, but the rest of the Bay Area has accomplished between 4 and 7%, and we have either approved or actually built almost 40% of our housing element. So I think the low income is really going to be a problem, no question about that. But we have made significant progress, and we have no control. If you approve a development, people are looking for financing, trying to decide, like Oak and Vine, we can't necessarily predict, but we have actually approved or built 40% of our housing element. And it started, so anyway, that's just something to keep in mind, although the low income is really important, and it could be the real problem.
Town manager.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Council Member Tripp, but I think the question for the community and council to consider is, what is the tolerance or acceptance of having, HCD directing, us to promote, the opportunity for higher density housing if we're not producing, which I presume in these other communities is what's happening. So we say, hey, we're doing, better than a lot of communities. We've hit 10% of our need. HCD may respond, I'm speculating here, that's great, Yountville, but you're not, we're not meeting enough housing. So, where you have 2-story zoning now, maybe we need to have 3-story zoning to help incentivize and increase the development potential and feasibility of sites. So that may not necessarily happen here, but just so everybody understands, while we may be doing better than most or the same as most, everybody else is, having those conversations or will be having those conversations with HCD on, do we make processes more streamlined? Do we increase densities? Do we increase building heights? And so that's the consideration and risk, in sitting back and relaxing. And I know you're not suggesting that we sit back and relax, but I just want to make that point clear.
Well, and I completely understand that. And I'd mentioned this to you. I had the chance at one point to be the regulatory affairs officer for C&H Sugar in Crockett, and so I dealt a lot with agencies. And one of my comments to you was, and they have a lot of discretion as to when they put you in the non-performing box or the whatever. C&H was never in that box, but I just in terms of talking to the regulators, as Eric mentioned, we bought an entire site and paid for it ourselves with the intention of putting up housing, affordable housing, which I am still a proponent that happens. I would think that would show to HCD that we are not really foot dragging, because that's a pretty extraordinary thing to have done, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we're obviously not a community that's saying, no, we don't want to invest, no. And there are a number of communities that have said that, basically, and those are the ones who are decertified and getting sued and fined and whatnot. So I wanted to add that. I feel like Yountville has been a good citizen in this regard.
I think that's a fair comment, and absolutely, if we get in those discussions, we would point to those kinds of things.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. The interesting thing, I think, just with HCD, which concerns me, is I've never been able to fully understand why they're concerned with above moderate development, because in our community, people are going to build, and those prices are not at any point regulated. So, at some point when we talk about how many of our arena numbers we've reached when we include above moderate, I'm not sure. I think our focus really needs to be on what we're doing, for moderate, low, or very low. And I think our community and the councils in the past have always recognized the importance of our inclusionary policy was 15% affordable. It was, we don't want the money because we know a little bit of money buys nothing in a town where homes and lot parcels cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've asked or told builders that to get some of the benefits of the development here in town, they have to build. So it seems to me, and so we have a 15% affordability requirement, or a 15% in our inclusionary, which was above many other communities in the past. But I think what we'll expect to see is that for 5% more, we're going to see builders that are going to go to that 20%, because then they're going to ratchet up and basically say, you need to approve this because we've met the state goals. We may have, like you said, some CEQA or parcel, CEQA review of things, but they're pretty much going to build and exceed what we have typically in the past reviewed and approved through Zoning and Design Review Board, and all those details will be gone in the future unless we're continue to do our best to provide and make efforts to provide housing. But I think most developers are going to go to the point where it's, they can build a few more affordable and get a lot more control over the project, what they want to build. And we'll see that here. We'll see it all over the valley, I think. So,
well, just following on all over the valley, I just really wanted to also bring up the Ag Reserve. I think that's what, a lot of the cities that we have here in Napa Valley, why they're challenged, because we have the Ag Reserve. We all love the Ag Reserve. We want to support the Ag Reserve, but it really constrains us in terms of what the state wants us to build. And even the county, they get their ABAG numbers too, and their RENA their RENA numbers from ABAG. So they are also very challenged. It actually says in, the last update on the voter approval of the Ag Reserve that the state wouldn't allow it to go through unless they put the language in the very last line that, except for affordable housing. So, the state expects them to still build out there. Right now, they've been able to do a lot of horse trading, so they didn't have to. The city of Napa taking a lot of the numbers and, the Costco area and all that kind of played into that. But, that's coming in the future. And it's, it's something that we all have to kind of keep in mind, too. And the challenges that we face here in the Valley with this wonderful Ag Reserve that we have in place, that's our livelihood. So it's a very interesting discussion, how this all kind of plays in, and the policies that, we have to make as a council to, abide by the rules that kind of come down from the state with no funding. Just want to say that too, everybody. So I'm going to let the public, I'm sure the public has lots of questions. Yes, go ahead.
Just one note that I think I think it's kind of something that's out there. We don't want to talk about it, but our 32 acres on the north end of town are not in the Ag Preserve. And right. 10 of that, I think 10 of that acres are in the floodplain on the east side, but there's over 20 acres of land not protected by the Ag Preserve and zoned agriculture in a community that's surrounded by the Ag Preserve. So I don't know. I think someday there may be a reckoning of that with HCD, but who knows? I mean, right now we've been fortunate to be able to preserve that, and it's privately owned. It's legal non-conforming. We have it zoned agricultural, and it's owned by a private. It's privately owned, but someday we may find some challenges to that. But
I've talked to old county supervisors, and when Yountville was formed, it was literally a paper map on the wall, and they got a big Sharpie out and drew a line, and this was Yountville. And I've heard people say that, that was never supposed to be in Yountville. So I know that will be a discussion for another day, and right. People argue over the thickness of the Sharpie line that was used to draw the jurisdiction. So, yeah, more conversations later on. Yes, Town Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Before you open it up for public comment, I did want to let Councilmember Tripp and the public know I misspoke about the difference in reusing vacant and non-vacant sites. It is the same practice. If you carry over a vacant or non-vacant site for more than 2 cycles, you are exposed to that by right with 20% requirement. So we can continue to count them, but we have to allow that by right provision or accommodate that by right provision.
Do you know offhand, for example, like the Catholic, what we call the Catholic Church property, that's been probably in 2 cycles.
It's been in 4 or 5.
Okay, so that really would be a problem. Okay.
It has been. And in the last cycle, HCD did require the town to rezone it to allow by right development, and that is what the R2 zone is in the zoning code. It only applies to that one parcel, and it allows by right at increased density on that site. And that's currently the law in
What
the town.
does that mean by right?
Yeah,
I mean, I remember I was on the ZDRB. It's very dense, increased, but what does by right mean? They can't say no?
Yeah, so just to unpack that. So HCD uses the concept by right, but you'll sometimes hear it as ministerial approval, and those are the same concepts. So you have discretionary approval and ministerial approval. Discretionary is you can say no if you have a reason in your code to say no. And that's usually the findings you make for a use permit or a master development plan or those sorts of things. Ministerial means if it meets the requirements in the code, you cannot say no. So if your code says no more than 3 stories and here's the floor area ratio and the setbacks are X and et cetera, and they check all the boxes, you have to give them an over-the-counter building permit. So that's by right in HCD speak.
So that is the status of that property now?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah. When
so
a developer
then-
comes in for that and meets the
Okay.
requirements, the town will not be able to say no. That's correct.
Okay, any questions, Councilmember McKee, before I go to the public? I don't see a yellow hand, but I can't always see it.
I had a low network connection, and I'm not sure that you can hear me right now. Are
Yes,
you
we
able to
can.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, because I've been on more than a minute delay, so I'm glad you can hear me. Thank you. So, Aaron, I think this is obvious, but of the 93 units in our site's inventory, how many sit on land that the town controls?
None.
Okay, so if either a private site develops this cycle, what's our remaining path to lower the income obligation?
Could you repeat that?
I said if neither private site develops this cycle, the ones that you had pointed out, what would our path be to lower the income obligation? Do we have one?
Yeah, I don't know. We would have to find alternative sites.
Okay. I have you. So when we looked at the occupations list for Yountville, what occupations in the workforce table fell into that very low income? And where we have built 1 unit of the 19. So we are extremely shy on the very low, which you have pointed out. Do we have any way to make a path to get there?
Outside of the housing, a path outside of the housing element opportunity sites at the moment, we do not.
Councilmember, I would just add, you could amend your zoning code to require additional very low units for all development. So your inclusionary housing ordinance that Councilmember Knight was referring to and that we've spoken about, it requires 15% of the units. If the development has 5 or more units proposed, 15% of those have to be affordable, but you control the affordability levels for those various units. So this council could increase the percentage that are affordable or the affordability levels for that inclusionary housing ordinance, and that would get you there more quickly.
Okay. So with the former elementary school site, with the plans that we were going to be considering, with the AMI being as high as it was, we totally would have missed this low level, which was in part way our goal. Am I correct that we were knowing that we weren't solve every solution, but we were intending to go for the workforce that was making upwards of $60,000 into $120,000. So if since we've missed that opportunity, is it best for us to wait to see what the property developer is going to bring forward, or is it in our best interest to be more proactive to take action to lay some.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, I mean, it's really a decision for the council. I mean, we don't have control over the church property, so we don't know when or if a development application is going to be submitted. We don't know what that application is going to look like, how many units it's necessarily going to be, and what their development timeframe is, whether building permits could even potentially be issued during this housing element cycle. So yeah, it's that property, to us, we don't control it. It's an unknown. So relying on it is, maybe not the best thing to do.
Okay, next,
Okay,
let me go with let Councilmember McKee finish, then we'll go with the town manager, and then back. Okay.
So just to make it clear.
Obscure question.
Councilmember McKee still has got one more question. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, this delay is killing me, and I'm sure it's killing you all too. Just the cost per unit of housing since 2018. What do you project it be by 2031? I mean, if the longer we wait, expensive this is going to be per unit. Am I correct?
I barely got that, but housing costs are only going to continue to go up, so it's only going to get more expensive.
Okay. Thank you. I'll stop asking questions.
Thanks. Town manager.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make clear for everybody with regards to housing sites, a good number of our developable sites at the, lower income categories, have been approved. We have, the Humboldt mixed use project. We're going to get a couple units from Oak and Vine. We may have an application on the church property. The French Laundry Garden site has to be rezoned, and that site was only included because at one time Chef Keller was thinking there might be a hotel project on that property, which didn't come to fruition, which is fine. So the point I'm making is we're running out of sites. We may be able to meet our RENA numbers this cycle, but we're going to have another cycle coming up. We don't know what our number is. But those sites that we showed you towards the end of the presentation, the Commons site, the Vineyard property to the north, depending on what happens with the church property, maybe a portion of that, those are going to be the sites we're looking at. Those are not included in our housing element now. And if once a site's developed, obviously, you can't continue to count it as a site that you'll meet your housing needs on. So just to make it clear to everybody, we're going to probably have to look at some of those sites, including the Commons site, including the Vineyard site, how much of those properties, how much housing we'll need on those properties to be determined.
Okay, thanks. Okay, it's time for the public. Anybody like to come up and just come up and state your name and the microphone? And
Stephen Becker. Unlike the past, I just have a question. Actually, first, a compliment, Aaron. That was a really good report. It was very thorough, and for somebody like myself who's not immersed in all of the detail that you are, that was clarifying. Hillary, can you pull up the slide of the Commons, that aerial view of the Commons? And so my question, Aaron, as soon as that comes up, I think I can ask the question before it comes up. It just helps orient it. It looks like, my question is, does the town own the other half of that land that goes all the way up to the road?
That's correct.
So has that been considered for housing? I understand the school and various buildings are sitting there, but has that land been considered as a site to increase the number of units?
So we're not there yet, but it's something we could consider in the future. It would be considered non-vacant, whereas the Parks and Playfield side's considered vacant. But yeah, I mean, that portion of the school site was something we were considering before, so Yeah, it's possible.
That's not the slide, Hillary. Yeah.
So that western half is zoned public facilities now, where the eastern half is zoned parks and playfields. But we own all the town owns all of that.
So the town could decide to include that in okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, Aaron, is the commons in our housing element now? Not the commons, but that piece of property.
It is not.
It's not. So we could definitely put that in. Hopefully, something will have happened. But worst case, it could be put in for the next cycle.
That's right.
Hi, I'm Michael Bork. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I was never prouder of our community than when it purchased the former school site. I hope that we can find a way to move forward in a way that satisfies the requirements that we have now. And I want to emphasize that one of my fears is that if we don't do that, the builder's remedy, for example, could create an explosion of things that we don't really want here. I mean, I've heard talk of there being, you just said something about 240 units down by the church, for example, in a part of town that is already really dense by virtue of the parks that are there. My concern, having gone through a couple of developments over the last year where we lost a sizable amount of control over them, going into a place where we lose all of the control could completely change the character of this town. The attempts to come up with a plan to use the commons in a way that was beautiful and didn't look like it was something you stuck, behind the railroad tracks in the south end of town. It's something I hope that all of this community can get behind and do something, and do it right away, because, as somebody pointed out to me recently, it's taken over 2 years to get the state to approve the pipeline that has to go underneath the river. These things take an enormous amount of time to do, and I just hope that everybody will get behind this. Everybody's purported to be really for this housing, and I'm hoping that people will do this, because I could see in 5 years or 10 years that we have massive buildings, unused parking lots that have been turned into condominiums, additional hotel rooms. All these things could happen here, and this is not going to be the community that I moved to 34 years ago and hope to live here for another, 10 or 20. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to come up and ask some questions? Hi, John.
Hello. Council, staff, and people behind me. I'm not used to you being behind me. John Dunbar, former of Yountville and currently in Napa. A couple of things I wanted to mention. I'm glad it was just brought up about the former school site, that the entire 6.8 acres is potentially available for housing. I saw that you've limited it to that one part that's zoned parks and open space, or parks and recreation. But that certainly makes a big difference because there's quite a bit of space there. I remember years ago we were told by the state that that's really, really nice that you have a 2-story height limit. We don't care. And that's the reality. That's really nice. We have properties that have vineyards on them. They don't care. And so to your point, Councilmember Knight, the Pelissa property that we were told years ago they had no interest in ever doing anything but have grapevines on it. And then recently we hear, well, the generations no longer are as committed to that, and it might be viable. I mean, there's some really severe steps you could take to make that a viable housing property that we in Yountville have never wanted to do. We've been hearing talk about that in Napa, about eminent domain. Those are really scary terms that we don't really ever, like I said, want to get to. But I found it interesting that nowhere in the presentation was there a single word mentioned about the veterans home. And I spent close to a decade working on trying to line up so many different state agencies and elected officials at all levels and community leaders and council and staff. And we had a project that was pretty close to at least a conceptual project of between 150 and 200 units in the northeast corner of the campus, which is basically behind Domaine Shandong. There's a vacant meadow, and there's a very old, one of the residential halls and 2 small staff houses. I had that all lined up with members of the Department of General Services and Housing and Community Development. We had 2 developers ready to come to the property and do a site visit and then potentially give requests for proposals. But at the time, it ran up against the skilled nursing facility. And the former VA administrator, Dr. Imbassiani, rightfully, he absolutely had the right to do it. He prioritized getting the state funding for the skilled nursing facility. That was needed. It made sense. I failed and others failed to convince him you could do 2 things at once, and that would be to provide affordable housing for your caregivers, for the veterans. It seemed to make a whole lot of sense. It ran into Sacramento red tape, because what General Services and Housing and Community Development said, the 2 things they require, local jurisdiction support, which we were happy to give, and support from the Veterans Affairs Department. And he was supportive of that, but not at the risk of jeopardizing the funding for the skilled nursing facility. He ended up getting that funding. And I would have hoped that between the town and the many local administrators that have been up there since then, that somebody would have picked up that effort and moved it forward. The governor put an executive order together that state surplus property would be basically granted to a developer to build housing. When Governor Newsom was here in Yountville announcing his millions of housing initiative, and he was happy to support housing at the Veterans Home. So I would strongly encourage those of you that are still in office, and I'm happy to help with the background on that, we keep trying that. It would relieve a lot of the pressure we're talking about today about the density and the limited locations and the inability to really control things that are privately owned. So people know how to find me if you want. Thanks.
And just to add on to that, we've been still talking with Calvet and DGS, and they do an annual homes update, and it's not in there. I asked why, and they said, we're willing in 2 years to talk about that subject again. So we've got, I do not take no for the answer. And so we still have lots of conversations, but, it's, they know that we're very interested, and we keep asking. So we'll be in touch.
Mayor?
Yes.
I think also, there are so many projects of deferred maintenance at the home that I am not hopeful that they will turn to a completely new set of projects to bring this, even though it's kind of skimmed on in their latest master plan that they should have employee housing. But with the change of administrations and the new secretary, their focus is much different, and their even if they did produce housing there, I'm certain that it would be filled with the caregivers of the home, not any of our residential needs, not our town employees. It would be the Veterans Home employees. And I think that's a great thing, but we still have a response. Excuse me? Hello? Thank you. We still have a responsibility to our workers in town as well. Certainly we could reach our numbers with RENA doing that, or hopefully doing that sometime in the future, but I don't see it helping. What we see is the major reason for coming up with the Commons as an affordable housing opportunity zone to accommodate our workers in town. So I think there's a lot of, yes, pros and cons to that idea, and certainly all of the cards are held by the state and not us.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. So I also want to welcome former Mayor Dunbar, council member, former mayor. He chaired the League of California Cities, a very prestigious organization for a year, and we were fortunate for a small town to have John leading the league and meeting the governor and doing things like that. I think those are all opportunities we have. I think the veterans right now are just hoping to see the Veterans Home in Calvet open in the skilled nursing facility. That continues to be a continuing challenge. I'm hoping that occurs, and then at some point, I think for just the goals of the community, we want to see housing up there, and if it's for those that work and care for the veterans at the Veterans Home, good. And when I go to work in the morning, and those folks are leaving early that have been there on the night shift or coming in to start their day, those are a lot of folks that are commuting from Solano and Fairfield, that if there's an opportunity for them to live on that home, like for years many did in some of those smaller cottages and things that are now not something you can live in. I hope we can support that, and I look forward to supporting the veterans and getting housing there, if it minimally to serve the veterans, for the folks that have to provide all the care that they need there. So thank you for joining us, former Mayor Dunbar. Thank you, and for your comments. So.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to follow up. I'm Jennifer Brewster. Follow up on John Dunbar's comments about the Yountville Veterans Home. I recognize that workforce housing here, low income versus their state, were very different. They are voting citizens of this community. And I think it's really important that they just had a board meeting in which their secretary was there and their Calvet board. And the big question was, of their 8 homes, what is the census? 62% of their 8 homes. So what does that mean for Yountville? If they're just looked at numbers on a piece of paper, there are between 500 and 45 residents that live there. The capacity is just under 900. In the past, we could go up there on a given day when there was 1,000 to 1,200 people up there, correct? Remember all those days. Now, what's the difference is, by law, they can't take in more veterans. And what does Secretary Kobe say, the things that he thinks about at night, is the census, deferred maintenance, and emergency up there. So when we have, and I keep repeating this every time I step up here, we have an ethos in the military, and I'm not military, but my father was, my partner was, we leave no man, no woman behind. We continue for 20, 30, 40 years to leave men and women behind on a waiting list for long-term care and memory. Because if you don't think that these wars, we ignored Vietnam, but I'm telling you, that man, that woman is here with traumatic brain injury. And that question was asked, and I invite you guys all to look at those board meetings. What is the most unmet need up there? And that is going to be memory and long-term care, because those men and women, it's 22 years out, and they're going to need those homes. And we are at 62% capacity across. That means that where are the other 38% sitting? And when you look at that budget of $161 million and divide it by 545 residents up there, I'm saying, why is it in existence? That's what I'm scared of. And what John Dunbar is saying is, we have got to crack the code in figuring out ways. And Marjorie and Pam and Hillary, you guys are up there every month, you know, at the allied councils, and you know what's going on up there. Our census is decreasing, and it's not a result of not having beds. It's a result of not having staff. It's by law. That new SNF was supposed to open up in 2024. It's not going to be at capacity from what I'm understanding, and I could be wrong. It's not going to be at capacity because we don't have staff. So we have to figure out a creative way to work with Sacramento and figure out, because they are your voting citizens. And I can guarantee you, I know I'm a pain in the butt up here at times, but I want to see what group is going to crack the code, because those employees will eventually they spend money in this town, but how, I know it's different, but we've got to get creative. And I firmly believe that we've got to leave nobody behind on that wait list, and that means bring more staff, and it's differential pay, it's workforce housing. I encourage everybody to look at those Cal board meetings, because they are just as concerned, but nobody knows how to break down those doors. So like John, we never give up. And in Tug McGraw's word, you got to believe, because we got to be able to do it.